nature is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you, your gas company, and the gas industry, who would like you to know that virtually all the natural gas used in North America comes from North America. And by Siemens Engineering Solutions in electronic components and medical systems, telecommunications, energy and automation, Siemens. And by Canon, quality and innovation for the way we work and live.
Of all the open spaces on Earth, none is more solitary than the ocean. Yet even thousands of miles from shore, sailors find that they're not completely alone. For coasting by on the largest wings in the world is the albatross. No other bird can match its prowess at sea. But the albatross is so large and so heavy that it actually can't fly under its own power. Instead, it's become an expert glider, skillfully using the updrafts of wind that swirl and bank off the waves. It can soar for days, weeks, even months without flapping a wing.
When it leaves the shore, the albatross sets out on an epic flight. It may wander the ocean for 5 years without once returning to land. Let's imagine this wandering albatross is carrying a small radio transmitter to signal his position. A week ago, he was sitting on an egg more than 1,000 miles away. Now his mate is in charge, and he's in his natural element. He's one of the great albatrosses. His long, thin wings span up to 13 feet. He's looking for the occasional dead squid or fish that floated to the surface. He's got to fly a long way to make a living out of such scattered pickings. He's capable of flying upwind, but tends to do so only in moderate breezes. He prefers to take strong blows on the beam. It's not wind, but the lack of it that gets him into trouble. "17 days out, he reaches Antarctica and turns west to stay over water. Most of the time, he's close to the waves, now and then climbing to about 50 feet. He seems to be going quite slowly, but he's making at least 150 miles a day and can travel up to 1,000 in a single day. He's come up with the westerlies now, so the going is fast. "26 days out, the batteries of his transmitter have died. He's flown almost 9,000 miles, like crossing the United States 3 times. But for him, it's nothing unusual. He'll be flying distances like this all his life. Albatrosses roam the North Pacific and all the southern oceans, but do not range into the North Atlantic. Most great albatrosses breed on remote windswept islands. This is South Georgia, close to the Antarctic. But here, there's just enough grass and moss to make into nests. The huge nests are exposed, but nevertheless help the birds to incubate their eggs. And the tussock grass provides some shelter. The nests are so scattered that this doesn't look much like a colony. But here on the Chatham Islands off New Zealand, it's obvious. These are also great albatrosses, royal albatrosses. 18 years ago, when these scenes were filmed, the birds nested in the midst of dense shrubbery. Even though recent droughts have stunted the plants, and now they provide little nesting material, the same number of birds still nest here. This ungainly bird is a giant petrel. Albatrosses and petrels are cousins. They both belong to the great family of tube-nosed seabirds. The petrel's nostrils open into a double tube on the top of the beak. But in albatrosses, there are separate tubes for each nostril. No one really knows what they do for the birds. The drip on the end of the beak is the bird's way of getting rid of excess salt from seawater. It's secreted by glands above the eyes and runs out through the tubes and down grooves on either side of the beak. All albatrosses lay just one egg at a time. If it's lost or fails to hatch, they don't try again for another year. This egg will need 11 weeks incubation, and both parents take turns. An off-duty bird always collects some material to shore up his nest before going to sea, but there's not much available here. He instinctively picks up a twig but doesn't carry it back to the nest. He merely tosses it behind him, and once he's a few feet away, nothing he picks up will be of the slightest use to his incubating partner. The right behavior is pointless in the wrong place. Off-duty birds are usually away for only a few days, but sometimes they won't return for 2 to 3 weeks. Great seas and gales are the everyday experience of royal albatrosses, but the gusts over these rocks can be dangerous for birds trying to land. With plenty of sea room, they can ride out the very worst gales. This is their real home, the wide expanse of the South Pacific. On the ground, gusting wind can make the task of incubation almost impossible. Some of them have a real struggle to avoid being blown over. Many eggs roll right out of their nests, and they're not recovered. In the most exposed positions, sitting birds can't even keep their wings folded. Only a few of these eggs hatched, and none of the chicks survived. It was a total failure for about 900 pairs. On the leeward side of the rock, these royals are catching soil as it's blown away. It's lack of vegetation that exposes the soil to erosion, and the high density of birds may have contributed to poor plant growth. It's easy enough to appreciate albatross problems on land, but it's been difficult to understand their life at sea. Some progress has been made by French scientists at the Crozet Islands in the South Indian Ocean, and they've made this video of their work. This is a wandering albatross, and the researchers are about to fit it with a small radio transmitter. The harness has been made of special soft leather. The bird itself weighs about 22 pounds and can easily carry a weight of more than 2 pounds. The transmitter weighs a mere 6 ounces, complete with its batteries. The transmitter is already sending out signals that are being picked up by Argos satellites. They're passed on to scientists at the receiving center in Toulouse, France.
The albatross locations are sent to us direct by telephone from the Argos Center at Toulouse. Within 1 hour after the bird has sent the message to the satellite, we have the exact position of the bird in the Southern Ocean. We can have it from everywhere in the world, at 1,000 kilometers from the Southern Ocean. To show us actually where the bird is, we have this nice little program called ELSA. We are working with our albatrosses at the moment on the Crozet Islands that are located in the Southern Indian Ocean. There are a group of 5 small islands. The 2 largest ones are the Possession Island and East Island. We work on Possession Island, the largest island where the colony of wandering albatrosses is settled. So we have tracked the bird several times during each period of the breeding cycle. These loops are again very long. The birds cover about 5,000 to 8,000 kilometers during one loop during the incubation period. Here are all the tracks of the birds breeding on the Crozet Islands. So during incubation, brooding and fledging period, all the tracks are appearing together.
The French work has shown us for the first time the vast area of the Southern Ocean traversed by wandering albatrosses in their search for food. So far, we've been seeing only the great albatrosses, the wanderers, and the royals. This is a much smaller bird. It's a true albatross, but these New Zealand fishermen call them mollymawks. There are several species, and these are Buller's mollymawks. Buller's mollymawks and royal albatrosses find perfect soaring under the cliffs on the Chatham Islands. The greatest number of mollymawks occurs in the South Atlantic. The Falkland Islands have immense numbers. Here at Steeple Jason Island is the largest colony in the world. It stretches along 2.5 miles of coast and contains 170,000 pairs. It's easy to imagine incoming birds getting lost among all these nests, but they're probably as familiar with their colony as we are with city streets and suburbs. A returning bird seems to know exactly where to land. These are all black-browed mollymawks. It's December, and the colony is full. Most birds are sitting on eggs, but there are still a lot of comings and goings. Rockhopper penguins nest among the mollymawks, and there are even more of them. The penguins find some protection among the mollymawks from the skuas that take eggs and chicks. Giant tussock grass would once have stretched as far as the distant shoreline, but over hundreds of years the birds have used it all as nest material. In the colony, there's no grass now, but the soil that remains is an excellent building material. No albatross goes away to collect materials. The nest is built with whatever is close to the site. It may get off the nest to collect mud if it's not too crowded, but it still has only the one collecting movement. Pairs return to the same site year after year. Usually, they only have to renovate last year's nest. In dense, level colonies, many birds can't take off by their nests, so they walk to ramps in the tussock grass, the mollymawk airfields. There are several kinds of black albatrosses. This is the black-footed albatross of the North Pacific. They breed on many tropical islands from Hawaii to the western edge of the Pacific, yet they range as far as Alaska and the Bering Sea. Their beautiful dark plumage may help them retain heat over the cold waters of the north. A breeding pair preens each other in quiet contentment, while two younger birds, not yet old enough to breed, practice the rituals of courtship. The rehearsal covers a complicated repertoire of fanned-out wings, bowing, head flagging, and sky calls. All North Pacific albatrosses begin breeding in winter, and this is the season of the typhoons. They drink rainwater when they're on the nest. Dehydration is the main hazard of long spells away from the sea. The best-known Pacific albatrosses are the Laysans of Hawaii. Slow motion with music may make lyrical viewing, but actually it gives a totally false impression of how Laysans fly. Albatrosses are fast gliders. They need waves and wind. The waves are their hills, moving hills, and it's on their slopes that they seek rising air. Most of the time, they're close to the surface, often right down in the troughs out of sight. There's more lift down there than they need just to stay up, and they can use the excess to accelerate in level flight along the waves. The high speeds they attain can be used to power steep pull-ups whenever they need to change direction or find another wave. but it's never necessary to climb more than about 50 feet above sea level. They're also helped by the wind gradient. That's the difference between the wind speed at 30 to 50 feet above the waves and at the surface, where it's slowed by friction with the water. But for many people, the albatross is remembered not so much for its impressive flight, but for its role in a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. An old man, the ancient mariner, stops a young lad on his way to a wedding and makes him listen to a long, dismal tale. It's all about an early voyage south towards the Antarctic.
And now there came both mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul. We hailed it in God's name.
But one of the crew, the old man himself, shoots the bird. The ship escapes from the ice, but its fate is sealed as spirits of the deep rise up to avenge the albatross. The ship makes its way into a great unknown ocean and is becalmed.
Day after day, we stuck, nor breath nor motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. Ah, well a day, what evil looks had I from old and young. Instead of the cross, the albatross about my neck was hung.
The hidden meanings behind these grisly events have occupied generations of scholars. In the English language, the albatross has come to symbolize something dead, a burden borne in primitive but just penance for wrongdoing. But for most of us, it's only the bird that is remembered. Real albatrosses are full of life. These are wanderers, and they're using the full expanse of wings and body to communicate. They're courting, and albatross courtship lasts a long time. These birds will not mate this year or perhaps for several years. Once they do pair up, there'll be no time for displays like this. Breeding will be a much less flamboyant business. Head flagging is part of the royal albatross's repertoire, and they don't spread their wings quite as often. None of the North Pacific albatrosses spread their wings. They flare them low like these immature short-tails. Other species don't use their wings at all. These are Galapagos albatrosses. Narrow edges on steep cliffs allow little scope for movement among light-mantled, sooty albatrosses. But they're unique in the way they present their tails. Distant calling and superb aerial displays have become the hallmark of the sooties. Space is so restricted in mollymawk colonies that moving birds are always disturbing someone and are in danger of being attacked. Crowding limits extravagant display. There are no sky calls here. Territory is signaled by a formal bow and a subtle showing of a colored stripe running back from the beak, the corner of the mouth, in fact. It's the same in bullers. All these displays show mollymawks trying to get together. They are precise sequences, and inexperienced birds constantly miss their cues. It may take years for them to get it right. This is the ideal. Two individuals at ease in each other's company, giving and receiving attention. It's the foundation for a lifelong partnership. The ocean around the Falklands provides food for enormous populations of seabirds. Black-browed mollymawks alone take thousands of tons of squid, fish, and small lobsters. All albatrosses feed their young in this way. It's semi-digested food regurgitated from the parent's stomach. At the edge of the colony, caracara chicks are hatching at the same time. The adults nest here for good reason. The colony provides ample prey. Here on the island of South Georgia, gray-headed mollymawks nest on the same bluffs as black-brows. Unlike the black-brows, which feed mainly on krill and breed each year, gray-headed mollymawks go more for squid. It's less nutritious, so they take longer to rear their chicks. And when they're successful, they take the next year off. In 2 to 3 weeks, both parents go off to collect food, and before long, the chicks are fat. Much of what we know about mollymauk ecology has come from measuring the amounts of food brought in by parents for their chicks. In the 1970s, when this film was taken, scientists were spending years making thousands of weighings before and after feeds.
Chick 34. Free feed, 2,400.
Now we can calculate the total amount of food taken from the sea year by year. The results are so important for monitoring South Atlantic resources that technology has taken over. The chicks now weigh themselves on artificial nests, and the data is recorded electronically. After 18 weeks in their nests, South Georgia mollymauks are almost ready to make their first flight. It's a crucial time. When they leap off, there's no coming back. It's already the beginning of winter, and elsewhere on the island, young wandering albatrosses are only a few weeks old. They're about to spend the winter growing up. It will take this wanderer a whole year to rear its offspring, so it breeds only every other year. When the white fluffy chick gets its first real feathers, they're black. It may be 15 years or so before this juvenile acquires its adult white plumage and is mature enough to breed. In the Hawaiian Islands, it's not cold but heat that black-footed albatrosses have to contend with. The young birds cool themselves by panting and by using their feet as radiators. Even so, some of them still die from heat and dehydration. For the rest, though, it will soon be time to go. And unlike the southern species breeding on high cliffs above the sea, these young fledglings have ample room to practice. It's said that seamen like these believed it was unlucky to kill an albatross. Some seabirds were indeed thought to carry the souls of men and boys drowned at sea. Superstition, however, was no protection for them. Often they were shot and left to die in the sea, or hauled on board and killed as trophies or food. On Captain Cook's first voyage towards the Antarctic, Joseph Banks wrote in his diary,
5th February 1769. 8 part of the albatrosses shot on the 3rd, which were so good that everybody commended and ate heartily of them, though there was fresh pork on the table.
Here at Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic, wandering albatrosses were all killed off within a few years of the first settlement, and they've never nested here again. But this sort of thing was nothing compared to what was going on in the North Pacific. In the Hawaiian Islands and many others, millions of seabirds, including albatrosses and their eggs, were taken year after year. The Second World War brought devastation to many Pacific islands. But at Midway Atoll, worse was to follow. An island once occupied only by albatrosses and other seabirds was turned into a naval air base. For years, there was conflict between giant aircraft and Laysan albatrosses. War was declared on the birds, and thousands were killed. But the birds always returned to the same nest sites year after year. Nothing the Navy tried could stop the Laysan's timeless dance. A parent wanders in search of its chick, aggressively rejecting all imposters. Once the right chick is found, the parent delivers the meal brought back from the sea. Straying into a colony of sooty terns, this youngster looks gigantic, a Gulliver among the Lilliputians. Derelict antenna masts from the 1950s littered the beaches of Midway for decades, trapping hapless chicks. In the end, the U.S. Navy learned to live with albatrosses, and today, in spite of runways, buildings, and people, there are more of them than ever. Affectionately known as the Goonie bird, it has become the symbol of Midway Air Base. But the greatest albatross tragedy was played out here on Torishima. That's the Japanese name for Bird Island, because once these slopes were crowded with albatrosses. Today, no one would dream of calling this volcano by that name. The short-tailed albatross was once the most abundant albatross in the North Pacific. But during the last 100 years, millions were killed for their feathers. By 1945, they were thought to be extinct, but luckily a few survived at sea, and in the 1950s, 1 or 2 pairs returned here to breed. There are now 108 pairs. The Japanese have declared Torishima and the birds themselves a national monument. Despite this protection, the threat of extinction still looms over this small population. The dark bird is younger. It takes about 10 years for its plumage to fade. As an adult, its crown becomes a delicate yellow, and its brown wings will turn pure white. The pastel pink and blue of its bill completes its subtle coloring. How tragic it would be to lose such an exquisite creature. Commercial fishing boats now work all the oceans of the world and often fish the same areas that support large populations of seabirds. Some albatrosses are attracted to ships, where many are caught in fishing gear. Drift nets and long lines kill thousands, but overfishing and pollution are even more worrisome. Finding food is difficult enough for the birds. That's why some of them flock to the easy pickings. But when stocks of fish have been exhausted and the ships have gone, there may be lean times ahead. Once, you had to be an explorer or a scientist to visit remote southern islands. Adventure tourism has changed all that. It's brought wild islands and seabirds within the experience of ordinary people. Dunedin in New Zealand has them on display. At the mouth of Dunedin Harbor on Taiaroa Head, there's a small colony of royal albatrosses. Anyone can visit them. More than 70 royals live in this colony, and some of them are at least 40 years old. None of these birds could possibly survive here without the help of people. For more than 50 years, they've been protected from dogs, cats, weasels, flies, and humans. When parents die or don't bring in enough food, their chicks are taken care of, like this 11-month-old fledgling. It's an example of the care and attention that has kept this colony going against all odds. The Taiaroa head royals are still wild birds, and no matter how much we look after them on land, they still have to take their chances at sea. What we can do to help secure a future for them is to make sure that the oceans remain clean and productive. For when an albatross heads for sea, it heads for home. No other creature is more suited to the wind and the waves. Nomad of the ocean, it is nature's sailor. John Masefield, once the poet laureate of England, knew the kinship sailors feel for the albatross.
Gonies and gullies and all of the birds of the sea, they ain't no birds, not really, said Billy the Dane. Not mollies, nor gullies, nor gonies at all, said he, but simply the spirits of mariners living again. Them birds going fishing is nothing but souls of the drowned, and the kicked as are never no more, and that there haughty old albatross cruising around, belike he's Admiral Nelson or Admiral Noah. When freezing aloft in a snorter, I tell you I wish, though maybe it ain't like a Christian, I wish I could be a haughty old copper-bound albatross dipping for fish and coming the proud over all of the birds of the sea.